My husband, a megachurch pastor, thought he orchestrated the perfect crime. He hid a biometric locked case full of stolen millions inside my cheap suitcase, intending to let me rot in a foreign prison while he ran off with his mistress. He had no idea I had already found the case, hacked the lock, and quietly slipped it right into her oversized designer tote bag instead. My name is Nia. Before I tell you how I brought down a holy empire right in the middle of a crowded airport security line, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever outsmarted someone who thought you were a fool. The Atlanta airport was a suffocating maze of stressed travelers and blaring announcements, but the true nightmare was standing next to me. My husband Desmond was sweating profusely. A man who usually commanded 10,000 people with a booming voice was now frantically tapping his expensive leather shoes against the scuffed tiles of the checkpoint. He aggressively shoved my battered blue suitcase forward on the conveyor belt, his hands shaking. He had barely looked at me since we left our house. His eyes were fixed on the bins inching toward the scanner. Behind us, my sister-in-law Harper let out a dramatic sigh. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking together. "God, Nia," she complained, her voice carrying over the crowd so everyone in the priority line could hear. "Could you not buy a decent piece of luggage for once? That thrift store monstrosity is holding up the entire line. You are always embarrassing this family." I kept my eyes facing forward. Harper loved reminding me that as the only white woman married into our prominent black family, she somehow fit into their luxurious lifestyle better. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "This is exactly why Trey and I did not even want you on this trip," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "You absolutely refuse to elevate yourself. You insist on keeping that boring government desk job instead of working in Desmond's ministry where a supportive wife belongs. You just drag his image down." I turned my head to look at her. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure my words carried just as sharply as hers had. "My boring government job pays for its own luggage, Harper," I said evenly. "I do not have to rely on the ministry to fund my life. Tell me, how is Trey's real estate business doing these days? Has it finally turned a profit? Or is he still paying for your Range Rover using the cash he got from secretly mortgaging my mother's house?" Harper's jaw dropped open, her pale face flushing a deep crimson. My brother Trey, who had been pretending not to hear his wife insult me, suddenly looked extremely interested in his cell phone screen. He shifted uncomfortably, unable to make eye contact with me. Desmond hissed at me under his breath, grabbing my arm. "Show some respect, Nia," he ordered, his voice cracking with an underlying panic I had never heard before. He hastily wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead using a silk handkerchief. "Just push the bag through the belt," he demanded. "Just get it through the scanner right now." He was acting like a terrified man approaching the gallows rather than a prominent wealthy pastor heading to an exclusive Bahamian resort. I watched my battered suitcase slide into the dark tunnel of the X-ray machine. I knew exactly what Desmond thought was inside it. I knew all about the anonymous tip he had already arranged for the corrupt customs agents waiting for us in Nassau. 2 bins behind my suitcase sat a pristine designer tote bag. It belonged to Sasha, the church's choir director, and Desmond's personal assistant. Sasha was standing on the other side of the metal detector, flipping her hair and smiling at Desmond with a hungry look that communicated more than professional loyalty. Suddenly, the TSA scanner stopped moving. The conveyor belt jerked to a violent halt, and a loud beeping noise echoed shrilly through the security checkpoint. The TSA agent, staring at the monitor, narrowed his eyes sharply and hit a red button, loudly calling for his supervisor. Desmond went entirely rigid, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen and absolutely terrified. The supervisor marched over, looking at the screen, before pointing at the bags emerging from the machine. "Step out of line," the supervisor commanded sternly, addressing our group. "Whose bags are these?" Desmond did not even hesitate to save himself. The man of God, the pillar of the community, the loving husband, raised a violently shaking hand and pointed directly at my chest. "It is hers!" Desmond yelled, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "The cheap blue suitcase. It belongs to my wife. Search her bag right now. I suspect she is carrying something illegal." I stood perfectly still, watching the dramatic betrayal unfold exactly as I had anticipated. The supervisor nodded at the TSA agent, but instead of reaching for my battered suitcase, the agent walked right past it. He reached into the bin behind mine and grabbed Sasha's pristine designer tote bag. "Mom, we need to inspect this," the agent said. Sasha's flirtatious smile vanished. Desmond froze, his outstretched finger still pointing uselessly at me. The agent unzipped the tote and reached deep inside. With a heavy thud, he pulled out the biometric locked metal case and placed it squarely on the stainless steel inspection table. "What is inside this locked container?" the supervisor demanded. Desmond staggered backward, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. He looked like a ghost staring at his grave. I picked up my cheap luggage, slung my coat over my arm, and gave my trembling husband a tight, knowing smile. He had no idea that his absolute nightmare was only just beginning. 2 days before the airport disaster, the crystal chandeliers at Atlanta's most exclusive soul food restaurant cast a warm glow over a thoroughly cold family gathering. We were supposedly there to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of my brother Trey's real estate agency, a business that had yet to sell a single property not owned by a church congregant. My mother Brenda tapped her silver fork against her champagne flute, demanding the table's attention. She stood up, smoothing down a sequined dress that Desmond had undoubtedly paid for. "I want to raise a glass to the real man of the hour," Brenda announced, her gaze bypassing her own son to land directly on my husband. "Desmond, you have outdone yourself. Paying for this entire family to spend 2 weeks in a private Bahamian villa is a blessing only a true man of God could provide. We are so highly favored to have you leading this family." Desmond offered a humble, practiced smile, bowing his head as if receiving a prayer. "It is my absolute pleasure, Brenda. The Lord has blessed the ministry, and I simply want to share those blessings with the people I love most." Brenda sighed dreamily, then her eyes snapped toward me, hardening instantly. "It is just a shame certain people at this table do not appreciate the magnitude of your generosity. You would think a woman who contributes absolutely nothing to her household would show a little more gratitude." I kept my eyes on my untouched plate of blackened salmon. "I am very grateful for the trip, Mother," I said evenly. "I even took unpaid leave from my desk job to make sure I could attend." Harper, sitting across from me, let out a sharp, derogatory laugh. "Unpaid leave. You hear that, Trey? Nia is sacrificing so much for us. Desmond pays the mortgage on a $2 million estate, and Nia is worried about missing a week of pushing papers for a government salary that barely covers my monthly salon visits." I took a slow sip of water. I did not look at Desmond, who was busy pretending to be embarrassed by the lavish praise. I needed to remain the boring, submissive wife. If they knew that my desk job was actually a senior investigator position with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Desmond's entire criminal syndicate would scatter before I could lock down the evidence. I needed them arrogant. I needed them sloppy. Brenda slammed her glass down on the table, leaning forward to deliver her favorite emotional blow. "You really should take notes from Sasha Nia. Now that is a woman who knows how to serve. She is at the church day and night, handling Desmond's affairs, directing the choir, organizing the charity drives. Sasha works tirelessly for the kingdom, while you sit at home contributing nothing to your husband's legacy." Trey chimed in, pointing his fork at me. "Mom is right, Nia. You do not even show up for Sunday service half the time. You make Desmond look bad. The congregation talks. They wonder why the pastor's wife is so invisible." I felt my fingernails dig into my palms. I was invisible because I spent my Sundays tracing fraudulent wire transfers through offshore shell companies. But I kept my face blank. "You could at least try to look presentable when you are in public," Brenda continued, her voice rising with a vicious edge. "Desmond is a high-profile man. He needs a wife who shines. You could not even give this wonderful man a child, Nia. You are barren. The absolute least you could do is put on some makeup and pretend to be the dutiful wife he deserves instead of acting like a freeloading roommate." The table went dead silent. The infertility shame was Brenda's ultimate weapon. For years, Desmond and I had pretended to struggle with conception, enduring fake doctor's appointments to keep up appearances. Only I knew the truth. I had secretly found Desmond's vasectomy paperwork a year into our marriage. He had never wanted children with me. He just wanted a convenient cover story. Desmond reached out and placed a gentle, patronizing hand over mine. Now, Brenda, do not be too harsh on Nia. The Lord tests us all in different ways. I love my wife exactly as she is. We carry our burdens together. The sheer hypocrisy of his gentle pastoral tone almost made me break my cover. He was a master manipulator playing the saintly husband while his family tore me to shreds. I offered him a weak, grateful smile, playing my part flawlessly. "Thank you, Desmond," I murmured. Later that evening, the oppressive heat of the Atlanta night seeped through the windows of our massive estate. Desmond had immediately retreated to his home office to take a private phone call, leaving me alone in the master suite to pack for the Bahamas. I pulled my battered blue suitcase from the back of the closet. As I unzipped the main compartment, my hand brushed against the interior lining. Something was wrong. The bottom panel felt unusually rigid, elevated about 2 inches higher than it should have been. The fabric was pulled tight, and a faint metallic clicking sound echoed when I tapped it. I locked the bedroom door. My federal training kicked into high gear. I carefully ran my fingers along the seams until I found a tiny, almost invisible zipper hidden beneath the luggage track. I pulled it open and peeled back the false bottom. Resting perfectly snug inside the hidden compartment was a heavy matte black case. It was constructed of military-grade titanium. On the front panel sat a small biometric thumbprint scanner and a digital keypad. My pulse quickened. Desmond was arrogant, but he was not stupid. If he was hiding something this secure inside my luggage, it meant he was setting me up to be the carrier pigeon for his illegal assets. I walked over to my seemingly boring briefcase, the one Harper constantly mocked. I bypassed the standard pockets and opened a hidden false back, pulling out a sleek government-issued decryption tablet and a series of bypass cables. I connected the bypass cables to the micro USB port, cleverly hidden beneath the biometric scanner on the black case. I booted up the decryption software. The screen flashed rapidly, running through thousands of numeric combinations and overriding the thumbprint requirement. It took exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds for the lock to emit a sharp mechanical click. I lifted the heavy titanium lid. The interior was lined with shock-absorbent foam. Pressed into the custom cutouts were 6 encrypted cold storage cryptocurrency wallets and a stack of crisp, authenticated bearer bonds. I pulled a portable scanner from my bag and connected the first cold wallet to my decryption tablet. The ledger data instantly flooded my screen. I stared at the numbers in absolute silence. $15 million. It was all there. The missing church pension funds, the vanished community center donations, the offshore kickbacks from Trey's fraudulent real estate deals. Desmond had liquidated his entire criminal empire into untraceable assets, and he had planted them directly into my suitcase just hours before an international flight. He was not just leaving me for Sasha. He was sending me to a foreign prison to take the fall for his entire syndicate so they could live happily ever after on stolen money. A cold, calculating calm washed over my entire body. I was not going to cry. I was going to completely ruin him. My fingers flew across the glass screen of my decryption tablet. A progress bar flashed neon green in the dimly lit closet, transferring every single transaction, every hidden offshore account number, and every routing code directly to a secure federal server. I watched the names of shell companies scroll past. Trey's fake LLCs were plastered all over the ledger, acting as the primary laundering funnels. My own brother had sold me out for a piece of the church collection plate. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the master suite. I immediately dimmed my screen, freezing my movements. Desmond's voice drifted through the heavy mahogany door. He was speaking in a hushed, giddy tone that he usually reserved for television interviews and mega church fundraisers. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. "It is already done," baby Desmond whispered. I packed the case right into the bottom of her cheap little blue suitcase. I held my breath, recording every word with a specialized audio capture app on my phone. "I know it is risky, Sasha," Desmond continued, his voice dripping with arrogance, "but it is the perfect plan. Bahamian customs agents do not play around. I already paid off a contact in Nassau. The moment we land, they are going to receive an anonymous tip about a high-profile American smuggling stolen bearer bonds and crypto wallets. They will pull Nia out of the customs line, tear her luggage apart, and find the case. He let out a low, cruel chuckle. Are you kidding me? Desmond laughed, responding to whatever Sasha had just said. Her family will not lift a single finger to help her. Her own mother already hates her. Brenda will probably thank me for finally getting rid of the family disappointment. She has been calling Nia a useless burden for years. With Nia rotting in a foreign prison for federal smuggling, I can file for an expedited divorce and take full legal control of her grandmother's historic estate in Atlanta. That property alone is worth another $10 million to developers. Then it is just you, me, and the islands. My chest tightened, but not from sorrow. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal was a physical weight, but it only sharpened my focus. He was not just leaving me. He was weaponizing my family's toxic hatred against me, using my mother's absolute disdain as a shield to execute a flawless framing. He intended to strip me of my freedom, steal the only piece of heritage my grandmother had left me, and run off with the choir director using money stolen from hard-working congregants. I stepped back from the door. My face felt like carved stone. There would be no dramatic confrontation tonight. Screaming at him would accomplish nothing but tipping my hand. I walked back to the open titanium case resting in my suitcase. I carefully extracted the 6 encrypted cold wallets and the stack of bearer bonds, sliding them securely into the hidden lead-lined compartment of my own federal briefcase. Then I reached into my tactical kit. I pulled out a standard-issue micro GPS tracking chip. I adhered the tracker to the inside bottom of the biometric case. To mimic the exact weight of the stolen millions, I grabbed 2 solid brass paperweights from my nightstand and placed them inside the shock-absorbent foam. I closed the heavy lid, letting the biometric lock engage with a solid, satisfying click. I placed the useless, dummy-loaded case right back into the false bottom of my cheap blue suitcase and zipped it up. Let Desmond think his master plan was flawlessly in motion. He was playing checkers against a woman who dismantled international cartels for a living. The next morning, the Atlanta air was thick with humidity as the private car service arrived at our estate. The tension in the house was palpable. Desmond was pacing the foyer, checking his expensive watch every 30 seconds, sweat already forming on his upper lip. Brenda and Harper were loudly complaining about the lack of trunk space, shoving my bags aside to prioritize their luxury steamer trunks. Then Sasha arrived. She claimed she needed to drop off some last-minute church itineraries for Desmond to review on the flight. She strutted through my front door, carrying a massive, open-top designer tote bag, looking at my house as if she were mentally measuring it for new curtains. She offered me a sickly sweet, condescending smile. "Good morning, Nia," Sasha chirped, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I hope you do not mind me crashing the airport ride." Desmond insisted I come along to keep his schedule organized. I smiled back, matching her fake warmth perfectly. "Not at all, Sasha. We appreciate everything you do for my husband." Sasha set her oversized tote bag down on the entryway bench right next to my luggage. She turned her back to greet Brenda, immediately launching into a loud, sycophantic compliment about my mother's sequined travel outfit. Desmond was distracted outside, yelling at the driver about the proper way to load golf clubs. The opportunity was perfect. I moved with the silent, practiced precision of a federal agent. I unzipped the false bottom of my blue suitcase, slid the heavy biometric case out, and dropped it directly into the bottom of Sasha's open designer tote. I quickly draped her silk travel scarf over it, concealing the metallic gleam entirely. I zipped my own bag shut just as Sasha turned back around. "Ready to go?" Sasha asked, grabbing the handles of her tote. She grunted slightly, her arms straining under the sudden unexpected weight of the bag. She frowned, looking down at her designer purse, clearly confused by the added heft. I stepped past her, picking up my now incredibly light blue suitcase. "Let us get moving," I said cheerfully. "We definitely do not want to be late for security." Desmond rushed back inside, ushering us all toward the waiting vehicles. He looked at my blue suitcase, his eyes lingering on it with a mixture of terror and twisted triumph. He had absolutely no idea that the contraband meant to destroy my life was currently swinging from the shoulder of his beloved mistress. The stage was set. The trap was armed. All I had to do now was let them walk right into it. The stainless steel inspection table felt like the center of the universe. The TSA supervisor glared at Desmond, demanding to know what was inside the heavy titanium case pulled from Sasha's designer tote. Sasha let out a high-pitched shriek, backing away from her own bag. "I have never seen that before in my life!" Sasha yelled, her heavily glossed lips trembling. "That is not mine. Someone planted that on me." Desmond looked like he was about to vomit. His eyes darted wildly from the biometric scanner on the case to my perfectly calm face, and then to Sasha. His entire grand scheme was imploding right in front of him. If the TSA forced that case open, his stolen $15 million would be exposed, and Sasha would take the fall. He needed Sasha. He needed his money. Desmond lunged forward, shoving himself between the TSA agent and the inspection table. "It is church property," Desmond barked, his voice laced with artificial authority. "Highly confidential tithing records and proprietary religious documents. I demand to speak to Airport Commissioner Davis immediately." The supervisor crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Sir, I do not care who you know. We need to open this case." Desmond was already dialing his phone with slick, shaking fingers. He paced a tight circle, his expensive suit suddenly looking a size too big. He pulled the supervisor aside, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. I watched as Desmond logged into a banking app on his phone. He furiously typed in a series of numbers. He was paying a massive, instantaneous bribe. Desmond had built an empire by purchasing the loyalty of powerful men, and he was currently draining his emergency operational funds to buy his way out of this checkpoint. Within exactly 3 minutes, the supervisor's radio crackled. A voice barked a direct order from upper management. The supervisor turned a sickening shade of pale, cleared his throat, and shoved the heavy case back into Sasha's tote bag. "You are cleared to proceed, Pastor," the supervisor muttered, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in our party. "Have a blessed flight." Desmond grabbed Sasha's arm so hard she winced, practically dragging her toward the boarding gate. He immediately pulled his phone back out, frantically typing another message. He was canceling the anonymous tip he had arranged for the Bahamian customs agents. He had paid heavily to set me up, and now he was paying double to call off his own corrupt trap so Sasha would not end up in a Nassau prison. I walked behind them, pulling my delightfully empty blue suitcase, enjoying the absolute terror radiating from my husband's rigid shoulders. The flight to the Bahamas was agonizing for everyone except me. Desmond spent the entire journey downing straight vodka and glaring at Sasha. He clearly believed she had gotten greedy and moved the case to her own bag to secure the funds for herself. Sasha sat frozen in her first-class seat, completely bewildered by Desmond's sudden suffocating hostility. I read a magazine, savoring the complimentary sparkling water. When we finally arrived at the ultra-luxury beachfront villa in Nassau, the tension morphed into cruel entitlement. The property was a sprawling architectural marvel of white marble and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the turquoise ocean. Brenda and Harper immediately kicked into their usual dominance routine, treating the villa like their personal kingdom. Brenda marched into the massive foyer and immediately claimed the primary oceanfront master suite. She turned around and grabbed the handle of my blue suitcase, yanking it out of my hand. "You will not be needing to unpack anywhere near the main quarters," Nia, Brenda announced, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She dragged my bag down a narrow, dimly lit secondary hallway and shoved it forcefully through a plain wooden door. I followed her and looked inside. It was a tiny, windowless maid's quarters with a single twin bed and a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Harper strolled up behind me, an expensive cocktail already in her hand. She took a slow sip and smirked, her diamond earrings catching the hallway light. She shoved her empty condensation-covered glass directly against my chest, forcing me to take it. "You do not mind the staff room, do you, Nia?" Harper laughed, her eyes practically gleaming with malice. "You are so used to serving anyway. It fits your aesthetic perfectly." Plus, Sasha absolutely needs the guest suite right next to Desmond for church business. They have a lot of late-night planning to do for the ministry. We cannot have you getting in the way of the Lord's work. I looked at the empty glass in my hand, then at the miserable little room. You are absolutely right, Harper, I said smoothly, stepping into the cramped space. I will stay right here out of the way. Harper rolled her eyes, clearly disappointed that I had not given her the crying reaction she desperately craved. She spun around and strutted back toward the infinity pool, shouting for the private chef to prepare appetizers. I set the empty glass on the small wooden dresser. Less than 10 minutes later, the door to the maids' quarters swung wide open. Sasha marched in, carrying her massive designer tote bag. She looked agitated, her flawless facade cracking under the weight of Desmond's inexplicable anger during the journey. Sasha dropped her heavy tote bag directly onto my small twin bed. Nia, take my things out and hang them in the suite next to Desmond's, Sasha commanded, planting her hands on her hips with breathtaking arrogance. I am far too exhausted to deal with luggage right now. I did not move. I just stared at the bag resting on my bed. Did you not hear me? Sasha snapped, stepping forward and grabbing the zipper of her tote bag. She ripped it open in a huff, intending to throw her clothes at me. Instead, the heavy matte black titanium case was sitting right on top, gleaming under the harsh light of the bare bulb. Sasha froze, staring down at the biometric lock. She had forgotten it was in there during the chaos of the flight, and now she was looking at it with absolute confusion. Just as Sasha reached out to touch the metal handle, Desmond walked past the open doorway. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto the black case resting openly on the bed. His face turned a dangerous mottled shade of gray. The $15 million he had stolen from his own congregation, the illegal funds he thought he had cleverly hidden, were sitting right out in the open in the maids' quarters. Desmond grabbed the doorframe to steady himself, his knees visibly buckling as he let out a choked, panicked wheeze. He looked at Sasha, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of absolute rage and total despair. He nearly passed out right there in the hallway. Desmond choked on his own breath, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the wooden doorframe. Sasha, completely oblivious to his impending heart attack, simply groaned and shoved the black titanium case back into her tote bag. I have no idea why you made me carry this heavy junk, Desmond, she whined, rubbing her shoulder. I am going to put my swimsuit on. I need a margarita immediately. Desmond snapped out of his shock, his survival instincts overriding his panic. He lunged forward, grabbing Sasha by the arm and pulling her out of the cramped maids' quarters. He needed that case back right now, but he could not simply rip it out of her hands in front of me without blowing his cover. He dragged her down the hall, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper. I watched them leave, picking up a stray piece of lint from my twin bed. The panic in his eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I smoothed down my skirt and walked out toward the terrace. The Bahamian sun was blinding, reflecting off the crystal-clear water of the infinity pool. The tension outside was thick enough to cut with a knife. Desmond was pacing the edge of the patio, his phone glued to his ear, sweat pouring down his neck. He kept trying to gesture for Sasha to follow him back inside, clearly desperate to get her alone and retrieve his stolen millions. But Sasha was entirely focused on flaunting her body. She paraded around the pool deck in a microscopic neon bikini, laughing loudly and demanding the private chef bring her another plate of conch fritters. She completely ignored Desmond's frantic signaling. I took a seat at a small glass patio table, quietly sipping a glass of iced tea. I was enjoying the absolute chaos of Desmond's unraveling plot when a shadow fell across my table. Trey stood over me. He did not say hello. He simply slammed a thick, stapled stack of legal documents directly onto the glass tabletop, nearly knocking over my drink. Sign it, he demanded, tapping a thick finger against the bottom line of the last page. I looked down at the paperwork. It was a loan guarantor agreement for a massive, high-interest commercial loan. The interest rate printed at the top was predatory, the kind of financial trap that destroyed lives. I took a slow sip of my tea. What is this, Trey? It is a cosigner agreement, he said, crossing his arms and puffing out his chest. My real estate agency needs a quick infusion of liquid capital to close a massive commercial deal. My credit is tied up in other investments right now. Your boring little federal desk job means you have a spotless credit history and a guaranteed salary. You are going to sign this so the bank clears the funds by tomorrow morning. I stared at him, marveling at the sheer audacity. You want me to co-sign a predatory loan to save your failing agency? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Absolutely not. Trey's face twisted into an ugly snarl. He slammed his hand on the table. You are going to sign it, Naya. You owe this family. Before I could respond, Brenda marched over from her plush lounge chair. She had been listening the entire time, and her face was pinched with furious indignation. How dare you speak to your brother that way? Brenda screamed, her voice echoing across the pool deck. Desmond froze in his pacing, turning to watch the commotion. Sasha stopped eating her fritters. Your brother needs this. Brenda continued, jabbing her manicured finger an inch from my face. I gave him everything I had to get that business off the ground, and you will not even sign a single piece of paper to help him cross the finish line. You are selfish, Nia. You have always been selfish. Her words brought a bitter taste to my mouth. I knew exactly what she meant by giving him everything. When I was 18, Brenda had secretly drained the college savings account my late father had left me, handing every single penny over to Trey for his first failed startup. I had been forced to work 3 jobs and take out massive student loans just to survive while Trey drove a luxury car bought with my money. She had financially bled me dry for years to prop up her golden child, and now she expected me to offer up my credit score for the slaughter. I am not signing anything, Mother, I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. Trey's business is a black hole. I am not letting him drag my finances down with him. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. You are no daughter of mine, she shrieked. You are a bitter, barren, ungrateful woman. Harper, who had been lounging on a daybed nearby, finally decided to insert herself into the drama. She pushed her designer sunglasses up onto her head and sighed loudly, adjusting her silk cover-up. She strutted over to our table, putting on her absolute favorite patronizing voice. Nia, you people really need to learn how to support each other, Harper lectured, looking down at me with profound pity. This crab in a bucket mentality is exactly why you are stuck at a desk job. Trey is trying to build an empire. He is trying to elevate this family. You need to drop your petty jealousy and sign the paper. It is about building generational wealth, Nia. Try to understand that concept. I looked at Harper. I looked at Brenda, who was glaring at me with pure hatred. I looked at Trey, who was smirking, completely confident that his mother and his wife had successfully bullied me into submission. Finally, I looked over at Desmond, who was watching the scene with wide, terrified eyes. He knew my job title. He knew what words were about to come out of my mouth. I stood up slowly. I picked up my glass of iced tea, and without breaking eye contact with Trey, I tipped the glass forward. The dark liquid cascaded directly onto the thick stack of legal documents. The ink immediately began to run, the expensive paper turning to soggy mush. Trey let out a shocked gasp, lunging forward to save the ruined contract. Are you insane? He yelled. Generational wealth, I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the silent pool deck. You mean the money you launder through Trey's fake LLCs? The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Trey's hands stopped moving. Brenda stopped breathing. Harper's smug smile vanished instantly. I stepped around the ruined documents, looking directly at my brother. Do you honestly think I do not know Trey? Do you think I have not seen the wire transfers routing from Desmond's church pension fund directly into your shell companies? You do not sell real estate. You wash dirty money for a fake pastor. Desmond dropped his cell phone. It shattered against the marble patio, the sound cracking through the air like a gunshot. The shattered glass sparkled against the white marble. Nobody moved. Trey stood frozen, his mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air, his hands hovering uselessly over the tea-soaked ruined documents. Brenda looked as though she had been physically struck, her entire body trembling with unadulterated shock. Harper took a slow, panicked step backward, suddenly realizing that her condescending white savior routine had just stepped on a massive landmine. I did not wait for their inevitably loud and messy recovery. I turned my back on the entire group and walked calmly away from the blinding glare of the infinity pool, heading toward the lush shaded sanctuary of the villa's private garden. The garden was a sprawling labyrinth of hibiscus bushes, towering palm trees, and dense tropical foliage that swallowed the sounds of the ocean and the patio behind me. The air here was heavy with the sweet, suffocating scent of jasmine and the damp earth of the tropics. I navigated the winding stone path, listening to the rhythmic clicking of my own sandals. I knew exactly who would be following me. I had publicly humiliated his golden boy, ruined his immediate laundering avenue, and shattered the illusion of his absolute control. Desmond was a man who ruled by fear disguised as faith, and I had just stripped him bare in front of his audience. Heavy, hurried footsteps crunched on the gravel behind me. Desmond was not walking like a pastor approaching the pulpit. He was charging like a cornered animal. I reached a secluded clearing surrounded by high limestone walls covered in flowering vines completely hidden from the main house. I stopped and slowly turned around. Desmond burst through the foliage. His expensive linen shirt was soaked with sweat clinging to his chest. The veins in his neck bulged, throbbing with a frantic, unhinged rhythm. His eyes, usually so practiced at projecting warm, pastoral empathy, were entirely black with rage. The holy facade was completely gone. There was no televised charm, no smooth southern drawl, no practiced grace. He was just a desperate, greedy man watching his empire burn to the ground. "You think you are so smart?" he hissed, his voice dropping into a guttural, venomous rasp that his congregation had never heard. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my family and walk away?" I stood my ground, my hands resting loosely at my sides in a relaxed, neutral stance that any federal agent would recognize as preparation for combat. "I am not playing games with you anymore, Desmond. The laundering, the fake LLCs, the offshore accounts. I am done watching you steal from people who trust you." Desmond closed the distance between us in 2 rapid strides. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and yanked out a folded sheaf of thick legal paper. He thrust it forward, shaking it violently in my face. "You are going to sign this right now," he demanded, spit flying from his lips. I glanced down at the document. The bold heading was unmistakable. It was an irrevocable deed transfer for my grandmother's historic estate in Atlanta, the property worth $10 million to commercial developers. He had already filled out the receiving party. The deed was to be transferred directly to his church's primary holding corporation, which meant it was going straight into his private pocket. I looked from the paper back up to his furious face. "You must be losing your mind if you think I am signing my grandmother's legacy over to your fake ministry." Desmond's face contorted into an ugly, vicious sneer. He dropped all pretense. He reached out with terrifying speed, his large hand clamping down hard around my upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into my skin, attempting to use sheer physical intimidation to break my will. He yanked me forward, leaning his face so close to mine I could smell the stale vodka on his breath. "You are a barren, useless wife, Nia. Do you hear me? You cannot even give me a child. Your own mother despises you. Brenda would sell you out for a designer handbag, and you know it. You have nobody. You are nothing without me." His words were meant to be a devastating psychological strike. He was weaponizing my deepest insecurities, using my struggles with fertility and my mother's toxic hatred as a blade to cut me down. He expected me to crumble. He expected tears, apologies, and swift obedience. He had spent years conditioning me to feel small, constantly gaslighting me into believing I was entirely dependent on his goodwill. He was banking everything on that conditioned response, entirely unaware that the woman he thought he had broken was the very same woman who built airtight federal indictments against international criminals. "Sign the estate over to the ministry?" Desmond snarled, giving my arm another violent shake. "Or I swear to God you will not make it back on the plane to America. They will find you floating in that ocean, and nobody in your family will shed a single tear." The threat hung in the heavy tropical air. It was a clear, unambiguous promise of violence. A normal civilian would have been terrified. A normal wife would have signed the paper just to survive the afternoon. But I was not a normal wife, and I was entirely done playing the victim. I did not panic. My heart rate did not even spike. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, clinically analyzing the mechanics of his hold. His thumb was overextended, his balance leaning far too far forward. He was relying entirely on brute anger, completely lacking any actual combative technique. With fluid practice precision, I executed a flawless wrist release. I stepped sharply to the outside of his stance, bringing my opposite arm up and driving my forearm hard against his wrist joint, while simultaneously twisting my trapped arm outward. The sudden, agonizing leverage broke his grip instantly. Before he could even process that I had broken free, I used his forward momentum against him. I drove my palm flat into the center of his chest, shoving him backward. He stumbled clumsily over the gravel, his arms flailing as he crashed hard into the rough limestone wall behind him. The deed transfer fluttered out of his hand, landing in the dirt at my feet. Desmond gasped, his eyes wide with absolute shock. He stared at his empty hand, then stared at me as if he were looking at a complete stranger. He had expected a submissive, broken woman. He had just been dismantled by a trained professional in less than 2 seconds. I casually reached up and smoothed out the collar of my blouse, brushing away the wrinkles his hands had made. I stepped forward, closing the distance he had just lost. I stepped right onto the deed transfer, grinding the expensive paper into the mud with the heel of my sandal. I leaned in close, my expression carved from pure ice. "Are you sure you want to threaten me, Desmond?" I whispered, my voice carrying a lethal, quiet authority that made him visibly shiver. I looked him dead in the eyes, watching the dawning realization that he had drastically underestimated the woman he married. "You seem a little stressed today. Did you lose something important in my suitcase?" I left Desmond kneeling in the dirt, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto the hot pavement. He was staring at the ruined, muddy deed beneath my sandal, his mind short-circuiting as the reality of his failure finally penetrated his monumental ego. I did not look back to see if he would try to stand or if he would simply remain in the mud where he belonged. I turned on my heel and walked out of the humid, suffocating garden, my footsteps steady and measured on the winding stone path. Inside the main house, the central air conditioning was a blast of freezing relief against my skin. I bypassed the massive living area where I could hear Brenda and Harper still loudly complaining to Trey about the ruined loan documents and my lack of family loyalty. I needed a moment of absolute clinical silence to wash the tropical heat and Desmond's stale desperation off my hands. I found the primary powder room, nestled discreetly off the grand foyer. It was a cavernous, opulent space lined with imported Italian marble, featuring a massive gilded mirror and polished gold fixtures. I walked over to the sink, turned on the cold water, and let it run over my wrists to lower my core temperature. I stared at my reflection in the glass. My face was perfectly serene. My heart rate was a resting 60 beats per minute. Everything was proceeding exactly according to the federal operational timeline. The heavy, solid oak door suddenly swung open, snapping shut behind the intruder with a loud, definitive click. The brass lock engaged with a sharp snap that echoed off the marble walls. I did not flinch. I slowly reached for a thick linen hand towel and dried my fingers. I looked up into the mirror. Sasha stood leaning against the locked door. The cloying, sickeningly sweet choir director persona she had worn for the entire duration of the trip was completely gone. Her posture was relaxed, arrogant, and dripping with malicious triumph. She looked me up and down with absolute disdain, her eyes lingering on my simple linen trousers and modest blouse before sweeping over her own neon designer beachwear. But it was not her swimsuit that caught my attention. It was her left wrist. Hanging loosely around her forearm was a massive custom-made platinum Rolex. It was Desmond's absolute favorite watch, the one he routinely claimed a wealthy congregant had gifted him as a token of appreciation for his spiritual guidance. Seeing it draped over his mistress's wrist was a deliberate, calculated slap in the face. It was a territorial marker, an assertion of dominance meant to put me in my place. Sasha noticed my gaze in the mirror and lifted her arm, slowly turning her wrist, so the diamond bezel caught the harsh glare of the vanity bulbs. Beautiful, is it not? Sasha purred, her voice entirely stripped of its usual breathy innocence. It is a little heavy for me, but Desmond insisted I wear it today. He said it looks better on a woman who actually knows how to appreciate the finer things in life. I turned around slowly, leaning my lower back against the cold marble counter. I crossed my arms, observing her the exact same way I observed cartel informants in a federal interrogation room. You seem very pleased with yourself, Sasha. Sasha let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She strutted over to the vanity, completely invading my personal space, her expensive perfume filling the small room. She dropped her massive designer tote bag heavily onto the counter right next to my elbow. She unzipped a small makeup pouch and pulled out a tube of bright crimson lipstick. Why should I not be pleased? She asked, popping the cap off the lipstick with a sharp click. I am standing in a $20,000 a night villa, wearing a $50,000 watch, and I am finally done pretending to respect you. She leaned into the mirror carefully and meticulously applying the bright red color to her lips. She spoke to my reflection, her eyes entirely devoid of empathy or guilt, radiating pure, unchecked arrogance. He never loved you, Nia, Sasha stated flatly, pressing her lips together to smooth the color. You need to understand that right now, so you can stop embarrassing yourself. You are too rigid, too boring. You walk around like you are constantly evaluating everyone, constantly judging us. Desmond does not want a warden for a wife. He likes a woman who knows how to have fun with his money. I watched her drop the lipstick back into her pouch. His money, I asked softly. Or the church's money. Sasha rolled her eyes, turning to face me directly, her expression twisting into a sneer of pure condescension. Oh, please drop the righteous indignation. The church pays for everything anyway. Where do you think the funds for those weekend choir retreats came from? We were drinking vintage champagne in a Miami penthouse, while you were sitting in Atlanta balancing his boring household checkbook. Desmond built an empire, and he deserves to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He deserves a partner who matches his energy, not some barren, useless wife who cannot even give him an heir. The cruelty of her words was specifically designed to break me, echoing the exact same toxic poison Desmond had just spewed in the dirt outside. They had clearly rehearsed this narrative together, convincing themselves that their horrific betrayal and massive financial fraud were somehow justified because of my biological struggles. She wanted to see me cry. She desperately wanted to watch the realization shatter my heart into a million pieces. Instead, I simply smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a cold, clinical expression that made Sasha falter for a fraction of a second. You really believe you have won, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You believe Desmond is going to leave his empire, divorce me, and ride off into the sunset to live happily ever after with his choir director. Sasha recovered her arrogance quickly, tossing her hair over her shoulder and lifting her chin. I do not just believe it, Nia. I know it. The divorce papers are already drafted. The moment we return to the States, you are out on the street. But Desmond is a generous man. He is setting us up for a beautiful permanent vacation. She reached out and patted the thick leather of her designer tote bag, resting on the counter between us. She ran her manicured fingers over the heavy, rigid shape pressing against the canvas fabric. He even gave me a special locked case today. Sasha boasted, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, greedy whisper. She leaned in closer, her eyes gleaming with absolute triumph. He told me to guard it with my life. He said it holds our future. He trusts me with his most valuable assets, Nia. He never trusted you with anything. I looked down at the tote bag. Inside that bag was the heavy biometric titanium case. Inside that case were two solid brass paperweights and a micro GPS tracking chip currently broadcasting her exact location to a secure federal server. Sasha thought she was carrying the keys to a luxurious new life. In reality, she was physically carrying the final, irrefutable piece of physical evidence required to send both her and Desmond to federal prison for decades. I looked back up into Sasha's smug, painted face. The sheer blinding hubris of this woman was almost poetic. She had walked directly into my trap, locked the door behind her, and proudly confessed to enjoying the proceeds of international wire fraud. I pushed myself off the marble counter, standing at my full height. I looked down at her, letting a predator's smile finally reach my eyes. "I hope you hold on to it very tightly, Sasha," I whispered, stepping past her toward the locked door. "I hear the future can be exceptionally heavy." Desmond's face went completely slack. The triumphant sneer melted off his features, replaced by a pasty, sickly pallor as the Bahamian police captain kicked my cheap canvas suitcase aside. Folded linen trousers and a couple of romance novels spilled harmlessly onto the expensive dining room rug. There were no offshore bank ledgers. There were no bearer bonds. There was absolutely nothing illegal in my possession. The captain, a tall, broad-shouldered man with zero patience for wealthy American tourists, stood up and dusted off his hands. He turned his piercing cold gaze away from me and slowly swept it across the rest of the room. His eyes bypassed a terrified Trey and a hyperventilating Brenda, stopping dead on the trembling figure clutching a massive, oversized designer tote bag. Sasha looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. She was clutching her bag to her chest like a physical shield. Her knuckles stark white, her perfect red lipstick standing out against her rapidly paling skin. The platinum Rolex on her wrist caught the dining room chandelier light, flashing like a beacon of guilt. The captain stepped toward her, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "The tip was not about her bag, Pastor," he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Misplace the bag on the table." Sasha shook her head frantically, stepping backward until her back hit the mahogany wainscoting. "It is just makeup," she stammered, her voice pitching up a desperate octave. "It is personal items. You do not have the right to look in there." The captain did not argue. He simply signaled to a female officer standing near the doorway. The officer closed the distance in 2 rapid strides, firmly pulling the tote bag from Sasha's desperate grip. The officer unzipped the canvas, reached inside, and hauled out the heavy black titanium biometric case. She dropped it onto the mahogany dining table with a heavy thud that made the crystal wine glasses rattle. The sight of the case sitting under the harsh light of a police raid broke something fundamental inside Sasha. The grand illusion of her glamorous, jet-setting future as a pastor's wealthy wife shattered into a million sharp pieces. She looked at the stoic, heavily armed officers, then at the locked case, and the brutal reality of a Bahamian prison cell hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her undying loyalty to Desmond evaporated in a microsecond. She burst into hysterical, gasping tears. "He gave it to me!" Sasha screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the dining room walls. She thrust a manicured finger directly at Desmond, her chest heaving with sheer panic. "He told me to carry it. I did not know what it was. It is his property. He gave it to me this morning and told me to guard it with my life." Desmond reacted with the pure, instinctual ruthlessness of a true predator. He did not hesitate for a single second to throw the woman he had been sleeping with for 2 years straight into the fire. He took a large step away from her, raising his hands in a gesture of defensive disbelief. "I have absolutely no idea what she is talking about," Desmond proclaimed, his voice booming with righteous indignation. He looked at the police captain, his face a mask of pastoral shock and betrayal. "This woman is unwell. She is a member of my choir, but she has become completely obsessed with me. She is a delusional stalker. She must have stolen that property from my private office to frame me." Sasha gasped, practically choking on her own spit. "You liar!" she shrieked, lunging toward him before an officer quickly caught her arm. "You promised me we were leaving her. You said the money was ours." Brenda, who had been standing frozen near the ruined loan documents, suddenly found her voice. Her blind, toxic devotion to Desmond overrode any sense of logic or survival instinct. She marched forward, her face flushed with maternal fury, pointing an accusing finger right back at Sasha. "You lying Jezebel!" Brenda screeched, her voice cracking with pure vitriol. "You have been trying to ruin this man of God for years. You seduced him, you manipulated him, and now you are trying to frame him for your own filthy crimes." Desmond is a pillar of the community. You are nothing but a cheap tramp trying to steal from a holy ministry. The dining room devolved into absolute vicious chaos. Sasha screamed back at Brenda, calling her a blind, pathetic old fool who let a con man bleed her dry. Desmond shouted over both of them, demanding his lawyer, claiming religious persecution and insisting his ministry was under attack by a deranged stalker. Trey, sweating profusely, started yelling at Desmond, demanding to know if the pastor had just gotten them all arrested over a stupid affair. They turned on each other with terrifying speed, tearing flesh from bone, desperate to save themselves at the expense of everyone else in the room. The facade of the perfect, wealthy, devout family was entirely gone, replaced by a pack of cornered, snarling animals. The screaming matched the volume of a prison riot. The officers simply stood back and let them incriminate each other, their body cameras recording every single desperate, ugly word. And then, cutting through the noise with the sheer piercing entitlement of generational wealth, came Harper. She had been standing near the back wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pinched in extreme annoyance. Her designer vacation had been ruined. Her husband was sweating like a pig. She believed with every fiber of her being that this was just some lower-class bureaucratic misunderstanding that she was vastly superior to. She scoffed loudly, stomping her expensive sandal against the marble floor. "Enough!" Harper yelled, glaring at the Bahamian police with pure, unfiltered disdain. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Do you have any idea who my father is? We are wealthy, respectable Americans. You cannot just storm in here and treat us like street criminals over some stupid petty cash dispute." She marched right up to the police captain, completely ignoring the tactical weapons strapped to his vest. She jabbed her finger at the black titanium case sitting on the dining table. "That money is perfectly legal," Harper sneered, flaunting her perceived untouchability. "It is just liquid capital from Trey's real estate ventures. You people are wasting our time and ruining a very expensive dinner." The entire room suddenly went dead silent. The screaming stopped. Trey looked at his wife with eyes so wide they looked completely white. Desmond stopped breathing, his hands frozen in midair. Sasha clamped her hands over her mouth. Brenda stood completely paralyzed. The police captain slowly lowered his radio. He looked down at the locked, completely opaque titanium case. Then he slowly turned his head to look at Harper, raising a single, highly amused eyebrow. "How do you know there is money in this locked case, ma'am?" Harper's jaw snapped shut. For a fleeting, agonizing second, the terrifying reality of her monumental blunder washed over her meticulously contoured face. She had just admitted in front of a dozen armed Bahamian officers and a recording body camera that she possessed intimate, specific knowledge of the contents of a highly secure biometric case currently at the dead center of a federal raid. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her designer tan looking sallow and gray. She swallowed hard, her throat visibly working as her mind scrambled for a lifeline. Then, like flipping a mechanical switch, she pivoted. She deployed the only defense mechanism she had ever needed in her deeply privileged, sheltered life. She weaponized her outrage. "I demand your badge number," Harper shrieked, her voice suddenly taking on a shrill, piercing quality designed to command managers and terrify retail workers. She took an aggressive step toward the captain, jabbing her manicured finger directly at his tactical vest. "I want your badge number right now. I am calling the United States Embassy immediately. You are deliberately targeting me because I am a wealthy white woman vacationing on your island. This is blatant harassment. This is extortion. I will have your job for this. My family has senators on speed dial." The Bahamian police captain did not flinch. He did not step back. He simply stared down at her with the cold, immovable patience of a glacier, completely unfazed by her hysterical threats. I pushed myself off the marble counter and stepped forward into the center of the room. The time for silent observation was officially over. The trap had been sprung, the rats were tearing each other apart, and it was time to drop the guillotine. "She knows about the money," I said, my voice cutting through Harper's shrill, hysterical threats with calm, absolute authority. I kept my eyes locked on Harper as I spoke to the captain. "She knows exactly how much liquid capital is inside that case, because Harper is the one who set up the shell companies in the Cayman Islands for Desmond." The silence that crashed down over the dining room this time was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum sucking the air straight from the lungs of everyone present. Trey physically stumbled backward, his hips slamming hard into the edge of the mahogany dining table. His face was a portrait of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at me, blinking rapidly as if trying to clear a sudden fog from his vision, then turned his wide, confused eyes to his wife. "What are you talking about?" Trey stammered, his voice cracking and pitching up like a terrified child. He reached out a trembling hand toward Harper, desperately seeking reassurance. "My business is real. I built that portfolio from the ground up. Tell her she is lying, Harper. Tell them my real estate ventures are legitimate." Harper did not reach back to take her husband's hand. Instead, she looked at Trey with a level of utter chilling disgust that made Brenda gasp aloud from her chair. The facade of the supportive, loving, devoted wife dissolved instantly. She looked at the man she had married as if he were a disgusting insect she had just scraped off her expensive shoe. "You absolute idiot!" Harper spat, her voice dripping with pure, unmasked venom. "You could not build a Lego house, let alone a real estate empire. Your business is a front, Trey. It is a complete fabricated illusion. I have been washing Desmond's stolen church money through your fake LLCs for 2 solid years." Trey looked like he had been physically gutted with a hunting knife. He slumped against the table, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The arrogance that had defined his entire personality, the flashy cars, the endless boasting about himself, made wealth the constant smug belittling of my modest government job, was entirely based on a lie. He was nothing but a useful idiot, a hollow, clueless figurehead propped up by his criminal brother and his ruthless, calculating wife. "Did you honestly believe you were suddenly a real estate prodigy?" Harper continued to mock him completely, ignoring the armed police surrounding them. "Did you think those multi-million-dollar investments just miraculously appeared in your corporate accounts because of your brilliant networking skills at the golf course? You spent your days drinking single malt scotch and taking clients to expensive lunches, while I sat in the office falsifying property deeds, structuring offshore routing numbers, and making sure the IRS did not notice that your holy brother was draining his entire congregation dry." Desmond let out a strangled, pathetic sound. His entire criminal enterprise, his meticulously crafted empire of lies and spiritual manipulation, was being laid bare in front of armed police by his own family. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting frantically, searching for an exit, searching for a scapegoat, but there was nowhere left to run. Brenda clutched her chest, her knees finally giving out completely as she collapsed into a dining chair, moaning hysterically about her ruined family and her destroyed legacy. Harper, however, still believed she was immune. She was completely intoxicated by her own delusion. She still believed her wealth, her status, and her blue passport provided an impenetrable shield against any real-world consequences. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder, grabbed her designer purse from a nearby chair, and glared at the police captain with absolute defiance. "I am done with this circus," Harper announced, her voice dripping with extreme entitlement. "I am an American citizen. I am not answering any more of your ridiculous questions, and I am certainly not staying in this room with these pathetic, incompetent losers for another second." She turned on her heel and marched toward the heavy oak doors, leading out to the grand foyer. The Bahamian officers did not move a single muscle to stop her. They simply watched her approach the exit, parting slightly in a silent, coordinated movement to let her reach the heavy brass handles. Harper reached out, an arrogant, victorious smirk returning to her lips, fully expecting to walk out into the humid tropical night, hail a private car, and simply catch a flight back to her comfortable, shielded reality. She grabbed the handles and pulled, but the doors opened from the other side before she could even turn the brass knobs. The heavy wood swung inward with a forceful shove, forcing Harper to stumble backward in surprise, her designer heels skidding against the marble floor. 2 men stepped decisively into the dining room. They were not wearing Bahamian police uniforms. They wore sharp, impeccably tailored dark suits. Their posture was rigid, their expressions completely devoid of emotion, and they carried an aura of absolute terrifying authority. The lead man reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and flipped it open to display a gleaming gold shield. FBI. The agent stated, his voice echoing through the room with absolute finality. Nobody is leaving. The entire dining room instantly transformed from a screaming, chaotic battleground into a perfectly frozen tableau. The sheer, undeniable gravity of the FBI presence hit the room like a physical shockwave. Harper, who had just spent the last 5 minutes screaming about her wealth and threatening diplomatic consequences, practically shrank into the mahogany wainscoting. Her arrogant posture collapsed. Her designer handbag slipped from her trembling fingers and hit the marble floor with a dull thud. The intoxicating delusion of her untouchable upper-class privilege evaporated in a split second, leaving behind nothing but raw, naked terror. The lead FBI agent stepped fully into the light of the crystal chandeliers. He was a seasoned, graying man with sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He did not look at Harper. He walked directly past her shivering form without giving her a single glance. He continued his deliberate pace across the dining room, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the floor. He walked right past Trey, who was currently gripping the edge of the dining table so hard his knuckles were translucent. He walked past Sasha, who was openly weeping into her hands, completely destroyed by the realization that she had personally transported federal evidence. He walked straight past Desmond, completely ignoring the disgraced, sweating pastor, whose chest was heaving with panic. The agent stopped directly in front of me. The Bahamian police captain stepped aside, offering a short, respectful nod. The FBI agent reached into his inner suit jacket pocket. He did not pull out a pair of handcuffs. He pulled out a black leather credential case. "Good evening, investigator," the agent said, his voice respectful and strictly professional. He extended his hand, offering me the leather case. "Everything is secured. The perimeter is locked down. The Bahamian task force has full custody of the physical evidence, and the audio recording of the confessions is crystal clear. Outstanding work." I took the leather case from his hand. I flipped it open, feeling the heavy, familiar weight of the metal. Without a word, I calmly clipped the badge to the belt of my linen trousers. The gold shield gleamed harshly under the dining room lights, displaying the bold, unmistakable seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. Next to it, my identification card clearly stated my title: Senior Investigator, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. Desmond stared at this gold shield resting against my hip. His brain simply could not process the visual information. The cognitive dissonance was so severe that his legs literally gave out beneath him. He fell backward, missing the center of his dining chair entirely, and crashing heavily onto the armrest before sliding down into the seat, his mouth hanging open in a silent, grotesque mask of horror. He looked like a puppet with its strings abruptly severed. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was standing directly over him. I looked down at the man who had spent the last decade belittling my intelligence, mocking my career, and dragging me through the mud of his own monumental narcissism. "You thought my government desk job was doing payroll?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, echoing with absolute icy precision in the silent room. "You thought I spent my days stamping forms and filing bureaucratic complaints while you were out building a holy empire? You arrogant, delusional fool. I hunt international money launderers for the Department of Treasury, Desmond. I have spent the last 2 years mapping every single one of your offshore accounts. I tracked every wire transfer you pushed through Harper's fake Cayman shell companies. I monitored every single donation you skimmed from the church building fund to pay for Sasha's vintage champagne." Desmond tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, choking wheeze escaped his throat. He looked at me as if he were staring at a ghost. The realization that the quiet, dutiful, boring wife he had treated like a piece of broken furniture was actually the federal agent architecting his absolute destruction was completely breaking his mind. "You thought you were a mastermind," I continued, leaning down slightly so he could not escape my gaze. "You thought you were so much smarter than everyone else, but your ego made you sloppy. We had the digital trails, but we needed the physical ledgers locked inside that biometric case to secure a watertight conviction. We needed you to physically move the evidence yourself. And because you could not resist the urge to show off, because you had to fly your mistress and your family to a luxury villa to celebrate your grand escape, you walked right into the trap. You just brought your entire criminal enterprise across international borders, making it a federal offense. You handed the FBI jurisdiction on a silver platter. I turned my head slightly to look at Harper. She was actively hyperventilating, pressing her hands against her chest as if trying to keep her heart from exploding out of her ribcage. "And thank you, Harper," I said, offering her a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Your unsolicited confession to international money laundering and wire fraud, recorded entirely on police body cameras, just saved the Justice Department months of tedious deposition work." Trey let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying his face in his hands. His entire identity, his wealth, his marriage, and his freedom had just been incinerated in the span of 10 minutes. Sasha was curled into a ball on the floor, rocking back and forth, muttering apologies to no one. Desmond remained slumped in his chair, paralyzed by the sheer overwhelming magnitude of his failure. The trap had closed perfectly. There was absolutely no way out. But then the deep, impenetrable silence of the dining room was shattered by a sound of pure, unhinged denial. Brenda. She had been sitting frozen in her chair, her face a mask of shock as she watched her two golden sons be systematically destroyed. Her entire worldview, her deeply ingrained belief that her boys were flawless divine gifts to the world, was fundamentally incompatible with the reality currently unfolding before her eyes. Her brain simply rejected the facts to protect her fragile ego. She could not accept that her sons were criminals. Therefore, it had to be a trick. It had to be a malicious, demonic attack. Brenda suddenly sprang from her chair with a burst of frantic, delusional energy. She shoved past the Bahamian officers, completely ignoring the FBI agents, and threw herself forward. She stepped aggressively between me and Desmond, acting as a human shield for a man who had just stolen millions of dollars from his own congregation. Her face was twisted into an ugly, sneering mask of absolute hatred. "You evil girl!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing with raw, desperate fury. "You set up your own husband. You framed your own brother." Brenda lunged forward, her right hand swinging in a wide, vicious arc aimed directly at my face. She moved with the frantic, entitled energy of a woman accustomed to resolving every family dispute with physical intimidation and absolute obedience. Her manicured nails flashed under the crystal chandelier, her face contorted into a mask of pure, toxic rage. I did not blink. I did not step back. Before her hand could connect with my cheek, the lead FBI agent moved with terrifying fluid speed. He stepped seamlessly into her path, raising his forearm and catching her wrist mid-swing. The sharp smack of flesh against fabric echoed loudly across the dining room. He twisted her arm downward with effortless, calculated control, forcing Brenda to stumble awkwardly forward. "Assaulting a federal agent carries a mandatory minimum sentence, ma'am," he stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "I highly suggest you step back and keep your hands to yourself." Brenda gasped, wrenching her arm away and nursing her wrist as if she had been burned. She looked wildly from the towering federal agent to me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with unhinged disbelief. For 30 years, that raised hand would have made me cower. For 3 decades, her rage was the governing law of my existence, dictating my worth, enforcing my submission, and demanding my silent obedience to the golden sons she worshipped. Now, looking at her flushed, twisted face, I felt absolutely nothing. The fear was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of the gold shield resting against my hip. I stood my ground, squaring my shoulders and refusing to break eye contact with the woman who had abused me my entire life. "I did not frame anyone, Mother," I said coldly, my voice slicing effortlessly through her hysterical breathing. "I simply followed the money trail that your brilliant sons left completely exposed." "You are a bitter, jealous liar," Brenda spat, though her voice trembled entirely, lacking its usual domineering venom. "Your brothers are good men. They are successful builders. They are anointed men of God. You are just trying to destroy them because you could never measure up to their greatness." I stepped closer to her, forcing her to look directly at the reality she had spent a lifetime denying. "Do you know where that $15 million came from, Mother?" I asked, my tone mercilessly steady. "Do you honestly think Desmond is a genius investor?" Do you think Trey suddenly figured out the complexities of the international real estate market? Desmond did not steal from faceless, wealthy corporations. He stole the church pension fund. He liquidated the retirement accounts of the elderly congregation members who trusted him blindly. He drained the community center building fund that was meant for at-risk youth. He bled his own loyal people dry to fund his private jets and Sasha's diamond watches. Brenda shook her head frantically, pressing her hands tightly over her ears like a stubborn toddler refusing to hear a harsh truth. Stop it. Stop lying about my sons. They are blessed. They are highly favored. I reached out, grabbed her wrists, and pulled her hands down with sharp authority, so she was forced to hear me. He stole your retirement, mother, I stated, delivering the final fatal blow. The words hit her like a physical strike, but I did not stop. I laid out the precise, devastating facts of the financial crimes I had spent the last 2 years untangling. He forged your signature on a secondary mortgage for the family home. I continued, my voice ringing out clearly for the federal agents and Bahamian police to hear. He took every single dime you ever saved, every asset you owned, and funneled it directly into Harper's offshore shell accounts. He left you with massive tax liabilities and zero equity. You are defending the man who left you completely, utterly destitute. You are bankrupt, mother. And Desmond did it to you. Brenda went entirely rigid. The artificial, arrogant color vanished from her face, leaving her looking suddenly frail, hollow, and incredibly old. She turned her head slowly, painfully, looking across the ruined dining room toward Desmond. He was still slumped in his chair, sweating profusely, staring blankly at the scuff marks on the marble floor. Desmond. Brenda whispered, her voice cracking, sounding impossibly small and broken. Tell her she is lying. Tell her you did not touch my house. Tell me you did not take my money. Please, Desmond. Tell them this is a mistake. She fully expected him to rise up. She expected him to summon his booming, authoritative pastoral voice, to quote a commanding scripture to banish me from the room and to restore their perfect, wealthy reality. She waited for her golden child to save her. Desmond did not move. He did not summon righteous anger. He could not even bring himself to meet his mother's pleading eyes. He simply squeezed his eyes shut, his shoulders trembling, as he let his head hang heavy in total shameful defeat. The silence in the room was a profound, undeniable confession. Brenda shattered. The realization that her divine investment, the son she had elevated above all others, had actively and ruthlessly ruined her, broke her mind completely. She let out a guttural, agonizing wail, a sound of pure, raw devastation that ripped through the grand dining room. Her knees buckled entirely. She collapsed heavily to the marble floor, her expensive silk gown pooling around her as she sobbed uncontrollably into her trembling hands. The Bahamian officers stepped back, their faces grim, visibly uncomfortable with the raw display of maternal devastation. The FBI agents remained entirely stoic, unbothered by the dramatic collapse of a ruined enabler. They simply pulled the heavy steel handcuffs from their utility belts. The metallic clinking sound signaled the absolute end of the illusion. The lead agent gestured to his tactical team, signaling them to move in and secure the targets. The devastation was far from over. Trey, who had been staring in catatonic horror as his wife retreated and his mother wept on the floor, suddenly snapped out of his paralysis. The sharp sound of the handcuffs clicking open triggered a primal survival instinct. He realized with terrifying clarity that he had been completely abandoned. Harper had thrown him under the bus to save herself. Desmond had surrendered to his fate. His mother was useless on the floor. Trey looked wildly around the room, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically until they locked onto me. He saw the gold federal shield on my belt. He saw the agents waiting for my final confirmation. He scrambled forward, his expensive linen suit wrinkled, his face slick with panic and sweat. "Nia, please!" Trey begged, his voice cracking with pathetic, shameless desperation as he reached his hands out toward me. "You have to tell them I did not know. You have to protect me. I'm your brother." Trey's hands were shaking violently as he reached out to me. The heavy gold Rolex on his wrist, a watch he had explicitly bragged about buying with his first massive real estate commission, suddenly looked like a cheap, garish prop. He was sweating completely through his custom-tailored linen suit. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and pleading. He looked at me, the sister he had spent his entire adult life treating like a pathetic, underachieving disappointment, and begged for salvation. I looked back at him and felt absolutely zero pity. My expression remained as cold and unyielding as the polished marble floor beneath his expensive loafers. I did not reach out to take his hand. I did not offer a single word of comfort. Instead, I reached slowly into the inner breast pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the crisp, heavy paper I had been carrying for weeks, waiting patiently for exactly this moment. I pulled out a folded document, walked with deliberate steps over to the mahogany dining table, and dropped it right next to Desmond's confiscated biometric case. The paper landed with a soft slap, unfolding just enough to reveal the official county seal and the bold black lettering at the very top. "Protect you, Trey," I asked, my voice deadly quiet, but carrying enough force to make him physically flinch. "Like you protected me when you forged my signature to mortgage Grandma's house." Trey sucked in a sharp, ragged breath. His arms dropped heavily to his sides. The remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He stared at the deed sitting on the table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "Did you really think I would never find out?" I continued, stepping closer to him, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Did you think I was too busy with my boring government desk job to notice that the historic estate our grandmother left to both of us, the house she worked her entire life to pay off, had suddenly been leveraged for a multi-million-dollar commercial loan? You needed clean seed money to start your grand real estate portfolio, and you did not care who you had to rob to get it. You stole from the woman who raised us, and you stole from your own sister." Trey tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound emerged from his throat. He looked desperately at Desmond, then turned his pleading eyes to Harper, but neither of them looked back. They had already discarded him. "You thought you were a business genius, Trey," I said, shaking my head with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You spent the last 2 years lecturing me at every single family holiday about wealth creation, aggressive investment strategies, and the hustle mindset. You mocked my government salary. You bought imported sports cars. You bought a yacht. You honestly believed you were outsmarting the entire global financial system. But you were nothing but a useful idiot." I pointed a finger at Harper, who was currently glaring at me with the cold, dead eyes of a cornered predator, and then at Desmond, who was still slumped motionless in his chair. "Harper and Desmond used you as the ultimate fall guy," I explained, laying out the brutal mechanics of their betrayal. "They needed a clean name and a legitimate corporate face to open the LLCs and sign the massive commercial loan documents. They let you play the big shot CEO, while they quietly funneled Desmond's stolen church funds through your corporate accounts. You did all the heavy lifting for their criminal enterprise. You handled the layering and the integration of the dirty cash, and most importantly, you signed every single piece of paper." Brenda, still weeping on the floor, let out another agonizing wail as the reality of her second son's ruin washed over her. "Do you understand what that actually means, Trey?" I asked, lowering my voice to a sharp clinical tone that echoed in the silent room. "All the fraudulent loans are in your name. The offshore wire transfers trace back to your authenticated digital signatures. The fake property deeds bear your corporate seal. Desmond and Harper set it up so that if the federal government ever came knocking, the entire paper trail would lead directly and exclusively to you. You are facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud, bank fraud, and international money laundering." The realization hit Trey with the devastating, crushing force of a physical blow. The grand illusion of his life, his wealth, his brilliant business acumen, his inherent superiority shattered completely into a million jagged pieces. He had not built an empire. He had built his own federal prison cell. His knees gave out. He dropped heavily to the marble floor, his designer suit crumpling around him. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep. He did not cry like a ruined businessman facing the consequences of his actions. He wailed like a terrified, broken child, his shoulders heaving with loud, pathetic sobs that echoed off the high ceiling of the dining room. He collapsed directly at Harper's feet, his shaking hands brushing against her ankles as he sought any form of comfort. Harper did not offer a comforting touch. She did not kneel to console the man she had vowed to love and protect. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered revulsion. With a sharp, violent motion, she kicked him. The pointed toe of her designer heel struck Trey hard in the ribs, forcing him to roll out of her way with a sharp gasp of pain. Harper stepped right over her weeping husband, completely unfazed by the armed federal agents surrounding her and the Bahamian police blocking the exits. She squared her shoulders, her chin jutting out with extreme delusional arrogance. She glared at me, her eyes burning with the toxic entitlement of a woman who had never faced a single consequence in her entire sheltered, privileged life. "You think you have won?" Harper sneered, her voice dripping with absolute venom and unshakable confidence. "My father is a state senator. He will have my charges dropped before we even land in Miami." I let out a laugh. It started deep in my chest, a low, genuine sound of pure amusement that quickly bubbled up into the quiet, stifling air of the dining room. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a cold, terrifying laugh that stripped away the last remaining shreds of tension in the room. I laughed because the sheer, blinding magnitude of Harper's delusion was finally hilariously clear. She was standing in the middle of a federal raid surrounded by undeniable physical evidence, and she still believed her daddy's political connections acted as a magical force field against reality. My laughter caused Harper to freeze. Her chin dropped a fraction of an inch. The supreme confidence in her eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden creeping shadow of uncertainty. The lead FBI agent did not laugh. He stepped forward with mechanical precision, entirely unimpressed by her pedigree. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, stapled stack of papers. The document was heavy, crisp, and official. Without a single word, he thrust the stack directly into Harper's chest, forcing her to instinctively bring her hands up to catch it before it hit the floor. "Read it," the agent commanded, his voice flat and uncompromising. Harper stared down at the top page. I watched her perfectly arched eyebrows furrow in confusion. Then I watched her eyes widen. I watched her pupils dilate as they darted frantically back and forth across the printed text. "We raided your father's state Senate offices at exactly 6 o'clock this morning." "Harper?" I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. "We hit his home in Boca Raton 20 minutes later. We executed simultaneous federal search warrants on his personal servers, his campaign finance ledgers, and his private offshore holding accounts." Harper's hands began to tremble. The thick stack of papers rattled violently in her grip. The document she was holding was a printed transcript of her own encrypted digital communications. "You see, Harper, your father is a very pragmatic man," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "When my federal task force sat him down in an interrogation room and presented him with irrefutable hard evidence of his involvement in your international money laundering operation, he had a choice to make. He could go down with the ship, or he could save himself. When faced with 30 years in federal prison and the absolute destruction of his political legacy, your beloved, powerful father did not hesitate for a single second." Harper let out a sharp, choked gasp. Her eyes were glued to the second page of the transcript, reading a direct, documented email exchange between her and her father, detailing the routing numbers for Desmond's stolen church funds. "He took a plea deal," I stated, dropping the final crushing weight of reality directly onto her shoulders. "He surrendered full cooperation to the Department of Treasury. He turned over every single email between the two of you. He provided the decryption keys to your hidden servers. He surrendered your offshore ledgers. He threw you entirely under the bus to save his own skin. Your father is not going to have your charges dropped, Harper. Your father is the primary cooperating witness for the federal prosecution against you." The arrogant, untouchable facade that Harper had worn her entire life completely shattered. The physical transformation was instantaneous and brutal. Her perfectly maintained posture collapsed. The printed transcript slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering to the marble floor and scattering across the blood-red pattern of the expensive rug. "No," Harper gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "No, he would not. He would never do that to me. I am his daughter." "He is a politician facing a federal indictment," I replied coldly. "He did exactly what you would have done in his position. He survived at your expense." The realization broke her mind. The absolute certainty of her privileged existence, the unshakable belief that she was infinitely superior to the rules that governed ordinary people, evaporated in a flash of blinding panic. She looked around the room, her eyes wild and frantic. She looked at the FBI agents who stood like stone statues. She looked at Trey, who was still weeping on the floor, offering zero protection. She looked at me, finding absolutely no mercy. Then her panic morphed into something entirely ugly. The polished, sophisticated, wealthy socialite vanished, replaced by a cornered, rabid animal. Harper lost control completely. She threw her head back and began to scream. It was a guttural, piercing sound of pure rage. She turned her wild, furious eyes away from me and directed her wrath entirely at the Bahamian police officers standing near the exit. "Do not touch me!" Harper shrieked, backing away and pointing a trembling, manicured finger at the Bahamian captain. "Do not you dare step near me. You primitive, incompetent island thugs have no jurisdiction over me. I am an American citizen. I am worth more than this entire pathetic third-world rock you live on." The Bahamian captain simply tilted his head, his face a mask of supreme, icy professional disgust. He did not issue a verbal command. He simply gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to the female officer standing to his right. Harper did not stop her verbal assault. She escalated, unleashing a torrent of vile racist slurs and classist insults that echoed horribly off the mahogany walls. She degraded the officers' uniforms, she mocked their accents, and she screamed about her inherent, untouchable superiority. She revealed the rotting, toxic core of her character for the entire room to witness, proving exactly how little she valued anyone outside her immediate circle of wealth. "Get your filthy hands off me," Harper screeched as the female Bahamian officer closed the distance in 2 rapid tactical strides. "I will buy your entire department and fire every single one of you. You are nothing but ignorant animals." The officer did not care about her wealth. She did not care about her designer dress or her state senator father. The officer grabbed Harper's flailing right arm with a grip like an industrial vice. Harper shrieked in shock, trying to pull away, but the officer used Harper's own momentum against her. With a swift, practiced motion, the officer spun Harper around, slamming her face first into the beautiful, expensive mahogany wainscoting of the dining room wall. The impact knocked the breath out of Harper's lungs, silencing her racist tirade in an instant. "Put your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, her voice ringing with absolute, unyielding authority. Harper tried to struggle, kicking her designer heels backward, but the officer easily swept Harper's legs apart, pinning her securely against the wood paneling. The officer grabbed Harper's left wrist, wrenching it roughly behind her back to meet her right hand. The sharp metallic zip of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Harper's wrists sounded incredibly loud in the suddenly quiet room. The cold metal bit deeply into her skin, locking her arms together with zero regard for her comfort. "You are under arrest for international financial fraud and assaulting a law enforcement officer," the Bahamian captain stated, stepping forward to look Harper directly in the eyes as she pressed her cheek against the wood. "You are entirely under our jurisdiction, ma'am, and we do not care who your father is." Harper was completely neutralized. The reality of the cold steel binding her wrists finally penetrated her hysterical delusion. The screaming stopped, replaced instantly by harsh, gasping sobs. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks, ruining her perfect makeup. The untouchable mastermind of the family criminal enterprise had been reduced to a weeping, handcuffed prisoner, completely broken and utterly humiliated in front of the people she had spent years looking down upon. The female officer grabbed Harper by the bicep and hauled her away from the wall. "Walk," she ordered, dragging the sobbing, ruined woman toward the heavy oak doors. Harper stumbled forward, her head hanging in absolute defeat. She did not look at Trey. She did not look at Desmond. She was marched out of the dining room, her cries echoing down the grand hallway of the luxury villa, leaving behind a family that was completely and utterly destroyed. The heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off Harper's frantic shrieks. The absolute finality of the closing doors settled over the dining room like a thick layer of dust. The Bahamian police efficiently secured Sasha, pulling her up from her rocking position on the floor and clamping cold steel around her wrists. Sasha did not fight. She went entirely limp, murmuring incoherent apologies, as two officers led her away, a completely broken shadow of the arrogant woman who had proudly worn my husband's stolen diamonds just an hour prior. Now only Desmond remained. He sat alone at the massive mahogany table, surrounded by empty chairs, federal agents, and the shattered ruins of his holy empire. The silence was deafening. He looked at the doorway where his powerful mistress had just been dragged through. He looked at his brother Trey, who was currently being hauled to his feet by an FBI agent, still sobbing uncontrollably as his Miranda rights were read aloud. Then Desmond looked at me. The sheer, undeniable reality of federal prison finally pierced his suffocating narcissism. He had no political connections left. He had no shell companies to hide behind. His fall guy was arrested. His mother was paralyzed with shock on the floor. He had exactly one card left to play. He had to rely on the one thing that had always worked for him in the past. He needed absolute emotional manipulation, wrapped in the guise of spiritual authority. Desmond slid out of his chair. He did not stand tall. He dropped heavily to his knees on the cold marble floor. The sound of his kneecaps hitting the stone was sharp and pathetic. He began to crawl. The man who stood on elevated stages in custom-tailored suits, demanding thousands of dollars in weekly tithes, was now dragging himself across the floor like a wounded animal. He closed the distance between us, stopping just inches from my shoes. Nia, he breathed out, his voice suddenly transforming. It was no longer the panicked, wheezing gasp of a cornered criminal. It was the deep, resonant, melodic tone of Pastor Desmond. It was the voice he used to command arenas, to bring vulnerable people to tears, to extract millions from the faithful. Nia, my beautiful, faithful wife, please, you have to listen to my heart. He reached out his trembling, sweaty hands, grasping the hem of my linen trousers. I did not step back. I looked down at him, my face entirely impassive. "The devil is a liar, Nia!" Desmond cried, squeezing his eyes shut as tears finally spilled down his cheeks. He manufactured perfect rolling tears. The enemy saw the great work we were building for the kingdom. The enemy saw my anointing, and he set a snare. I was weak. I was tempted by the flesh and by the illusion of worldly wealth. But God is a God of second chances. Scripture tells us to forgive 70 times 7. You are a woman of grace, Nia. You know my true spirit. I am a flawed man, but I am still your husband. I am still a man of God. Please show me mercy. Do not let them destroy the ministry. Do not let the enemy win. The sheer audacity of his performance was breathtaking. Even now, facing multiple federal indictments, he could not take an ounce of accountability. He blamed a supernatural entity for his deliberate, calculated financial fraud. He weaponized our marriage vows, the very vows he had mocked and violated for years, to shield himself from a prison sentence. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading, waiting for the empathetic, obedient wife to soften, to yield, to protect him. I felt a wave of absolute, unadulterated disgust wash over me. It was so potent, it almost had a physical weight. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out a tissue to dry his tears. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, opening a specific audio file I had secured from the surveillance feed. I turned the volume all the way up. I held the phone down near his face and pressed play. The crystal-clear audio filled the silent dining room. It was not a recording of a man struggling with spiritual weakness. It was the sound of Desmond's voice, recorded just 2 days ago, speaking with sharp, calculating cruelty to Harper as they finalized their plans in this very villa. The recorded voice of my husband echoed off the walls. Let her rot in a foreign prison. Once the Bahamian authorities find the planted cash in her luggage, she will be locked away for years. We will have complete control of the remaining assets. And honestly, Brenda will probably thank me for getting rid of the family disappointment. The recording clicked off. The sudden silence in the room was heavier than before. Desmond's hands fell away from my trousers. The pastoral mask did not just slip. It disintegrated entirely. His mouth hung open. The manufactured tears stopped flowing instantly. He stared at the black rectangle of my phone as if it were a loaded weapon. The audio recording was the final irrefutable nail in his coffin. He could not blame the devil for a recorded premeditated plan to frame his own wife and leave her in a foreign prison. He could not preach his way out of his own malicious calculated words. Brenda, still slumped on the floor nearby, let out a sharp, horrified gasp. Hearing her golden child casually plot the destruction of a family member, hearing him use her own name to justify his cruelty, finally shattered the last remaining fragment of her denial. She buried her face in her hands, unable to look at him anymore. I looked down at the man who had stolen millions in the name of God. "Your anointing is entirely fraudulent, Desmond," I stated, my voice echoing with icy final authority. "And your congregation deserves a refund." Desmond did not speak. The realization that he was utterly comprehensively defeated finally settled over him. There were no more lies to spin, no more scriptures to twist, no more women to blame. He slumped forward on his knees, his chin resting against his chest, completely broken by the weight of his own monumental narcissism and greed. I looked up, making direct eye contact with the Bahamian police captain standing nearby. I gave a single curt nod. "Take him away," I ordered. Two Bahamian officers stepped forward immediately. They did not show the disgraced pastor an ounce of reverence. They grabbed Desmond by his tailored lapels and yanked the man of God violently to his feet. Desmond did not resist. He was dead weight, his legs dragging slightly across the marble floor as they spun him around. The heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, securing his hands behind his back. Without a single word of protest, Desmond was dragged out of the dining room in cuffs, his holy empire reduced to absolutely nothing. The heavy wooden doors of the dining room swung open, pushed back by two armed federal agents. The Bahamian police shoved Desmond forward, propelling him out of the private villa and directly into the sprawling open-air grand lobby of the luxury resort. The lobby was a masterpiece of tropical opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted mahogany ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. A live jazz quartet was playing softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack for the evening. The space was packed with the exact demographic Desmond and Harper obsessed over: hedge fund managers, international socialites, and foreign dignitaries. But far more importantly, scattered throughout the velvet lounge chairs and gathered around the imported marble bar were the elite inner circle of Desmond's megachurch. They were the platinum-tier donors, the wealthy board members, and the influential politicians who had flown down to the Bahamas on private jets, eager to celebrate their visionary pastor's latest alleged real estate triumph. The jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low, sophisticated hum of wealth and privilege died instantly, replaced by a deafening, shocked silence. Every single head turned to look. Desmond was the first to run the gauntlet. The man who usually strutted across massive auditorium stages with the arrogant, untouchable swagger of a modern-day prophet was now shuffling awkwardly forward, his arms pinned securely behind his back. The custom Italian suit he wore was wrinkled, twisted, and stained with nervous, foul-smelling sweat. He kept his head bowed, his chin pressed tightly against his chest, desperately trying to hide his face. But the harsh, bright lights of the lobby offered absolutely no cover. A wealthy church elder sitting near the bar stood up, his jaw dropping in sheer horror as he watched his spiritual leader being marched forward like a common street thug. Desmond squeezed his eyes shut, physically flinching as he heard the collective gasps and shocked whispers of his own congregation. The humiliation was absolute. It was a public, undeniable crucifixion of his own making, broadcast live to the very people he had spent a decade manipulating. Right behind him came Sasha. She was stumbling in her designer heels, openly and loudly sobbing. Her immaculate makeup was ruined, running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. The stolen diamond necklace glittering at her throat, a piece of jewelry paid for by the stolen pension funds of the elderly church members currently staring at her in disgust, was now nothing but a shining beacon of her guilt. She tried to hide her face behind her shoulder, but the handcuffs restricted her movements, leaving her completely exposed to the judgment of the crowd. Then came Harper. The Bahamian female officer maintained a firm, uncompromising grip on her upper arm. Harper had spent her entire life meticulously curating an image of untouchable elite perfection. She believed she was royalty. Now her designer dress was disheveled, her hair was a mess, and the heavy steel cuffs binding her wrists clinked loudly with every step she took. She tried to hold her head high, attempting to summon a final scrap of her signature arrogance, but her eyes darted frantically. She saw the disgust and mockery on the faces of the very high society crowd she considered her peers. The cell phone cameras were already out. Dozens of screens were held up recording her absolute downfall. In a matter of seconds, the footage of the state senator's daughter doing a perp walk in the Bahamas would be uploaded to every major news outlet in the world. Her political invincibility was gone. Her socialite status was dead. Finally, Trey was escorted out by the lead FBI agent. The visual contrast was staggering. This was the family's golden child, the brilliant, infallible business prodigy who had never once failed to meet Brenda's impossible demanding standards. He was supposed to be the billionaire real estate mogul. Now he looked like a hollow, broken shell of a man. His chest heaved with silent, pathetic sobs. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the church board members, who had enthusiastically invested millions of dollars into his fraudulent offshore shell companies. He just stared blankly at the marble tiles dragging his feet as a completely ruined man walking toward a mandatory 20-year federal prison sentence. The facade of their flawless, divinely favored family was not just dismantled, it was publicly, violently, and permanently incinerated. The whispers grew into a loud, frantic buzz of outrage and shock as the heavy glass doors to the circular driveway opened. The flashing blue and red lights of the Bahamian police cruisers and unmarked federal SUVs illuminated the tropical night, casting frantic shadows across the lobby. One by one, the false prophet, the desperate mistress, the arrogant politician's daughter, and the ruined golden boy were shoved roughly into the back of the transport vehicles. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a definitive ringing thud, sealing their fates and locking them in the dark. I did not follow them outside into the humid night air. I stood quietly at the threshold of the dining room, watching the taillights of the police convoy disappear down the long, palm-lined driveway. The chaotic buzz of the wealthy lobby faded into a dull, meaningless roar behind me. I turned my back on the crowd of shocked donors and socialites. I walked slowly back into the private dining room. I reached out and pulled the heavy oak doors shut, letting the latch click firmly into place. The action shut out the noise of the resort and plunged the room back into a heavy, suffocating silence. The federal agents were gone. The Bahamian police were gone. The tactical team had completely cleared out. The room was a catastrophic disaster zone of half-eaten caviar, spilled vintage champagne, and overturned mahogany chairs. The expensive crystal glasses caught the light gleaming amidst the wreckage of the extravagant, fraudulent feast. Amidst the absolute ruins of their criminal celebration, only two people remained. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting sharply of expensive perfume and cold fear. I looked across the long, polished table. Brenda was still sitting on the marble floor. Her expensive, tailored silk gown was pulled awkwardly around her knees. She was staring blankly at the empty chair where her favorite anointed son had been sitting just 20 minutes ago, her mind entirely unable to process the destruction of everything she held dear. The deafening silence of the dining room pressed down on us. Outside these thick mahogany walls, the resort was surely buzzing with the scandal of the century, but in here the air was entirely stagnant. I watched Brenda slowly blink. Her heavily manicured hands trembled violently in her lap. The stark reality of her situation was finally beginning to penetrate the thick, impenetrable armor of her lifelong delusion. She had spent decades building an empire of manipulation, positioning herself as the untouchable matriarch of a divinely chosen family. She had raised Desmond to be a predator, and Trey to be a willing accomplice, reaping the massive financial rewards of their deceit, while hiding behind a mask of devout superiority. Now that entire empire was reduced to crime scene tape and federal indictments. She had no golden sun left to shield her. Desmond was in a Bahamian jail cell awaiting extradition. Trey was facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Her wealthy, well-connected son-in-law was gone. Her offshore retirement funds, carefully siphoned from the church congregation over the years, were completely frozen by the Department of Treasury. Her massive, sprawling mansion back home in Atlanta was likely crawling with IRS agents right at this very moment. The massive public shame she was about to face would be absolute. The church board members, the politicians, and the high society friends she had spent years carefully cultivating had all just watched her entire lineage get dragged out of a luxury resort in handcuffs. She was completely ruined. Brenda slowly turned her head away from the empty chair. Her gaze dragged across the overturned mahogany furniture, the spilled vintage champagne soaking into the imported rug, and finally settled on me. I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed over my chest, watching her fall apart. For 12 years, I had been the primary target of her relentless, calculated cruelty. I was the unworthy daughter-in-law, the outsider, who was never quite holy enough, wealthy enough, or sophisticated enough to sit at her table. She had made a sport out of degrading me at family dinners, openly suggesting Desmond could have done better, entirely dismissing my career and my worth. Every slight, every backhanded compliment, every blatant act of disrespect had been designed to keep me small. But as she looked up at me from the cold marble floor, that familiar toxic contempt was entirely gone. It had evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked desperation that was almost jarring to witness. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone strands, falling limply across her face. The expensive diamond jewelry dripping from her neck suddenly looked heavy and garish against her pale, stricken skin. She was no longer the powerful, intimidating matriarch pulling the strings behind a megachurch. She was just a terrified, isolated woman who had suddenly realized she was entirely out of options. She placed her palms flat against the cold stone, trying to push herself up, but her arms lacked the strength. She slumped back down, her breath hitching in her throat. Nia Brenda gasped, her voice completely stripped of its usual haughty resonance. It was a pathetic, reedy sound that barely carried across the ruined dining room. I watched her swallow hard, fighting back a rising tide of panic. "I have no way home." I did not flinch. I did not offer her a hand. I simply stared at her, waiting. "The federal agents took my phone." She stammered, her eyes darting frantically around the room, as if searching for a hidden exit. The resort concierge just came in before they closed the doors. "They told me my credit cards are declining, every single one of them. The bank blocked my personal accounts. The church accounts are completely frozen. I have absolutely nothing on me. I cannot even book a commercial flight out of this country. I cannot pay for this villa. They are going to throw me out into the street." She looked up at me, the desperation morphing into a frantic, begging plea. "You have to help me, Nia. You are the only one left. You have your own accounts. You have your business money safely tucked away. You have to get me back to the States. I am an old woman. You cannot just leave me here in a foreign country with nothing. Please, we are family." The sheer audacity of her invoking the word family almost made me smile. After years of treating me like dirt on her shoe, after actively participating in a scheme that would have left me rotting in a Bahamian prison cell for decades, she still believed she was entitled to my protection. She still believed my purpose was to serve her needs. I uncrossed my arms. I reached into my designer handbag, my movements slow and deliberate. Brenda watched me with wide, hopeful eyes practically vibrating with relief as she anticipated a rescue. She thought I was pulling out a black card. She thought I was pulling out a phone to arrange a private charter flight back to Atlanta. Instead, my fingers found a single folded piece of paper currency. I pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I held it up between my index and middle finger, letting the bright green paper catch the light from the chandeliers overhead. Brenda's brow furrowed in severe confusion. Her hopeful expression faltered, replaced instantly by a look of total bewilderment. I took one step forward and tossed the bill. It fluttered through the air, drifting slowly downwards until it landed right next to her overturned empty porcelain plate on the floor. When I was 19 years old, I said, my voice ringing with a cold, absolute finality that commanded the entire room. I came to you begging for help. My father had just died. My mother was sick. I was about to be dropped from my university classes because I could not make the final tuition payment. I asked you for a loan. I promised to pay you back every single cent with interest once I graduated. Brenda stared at the $20 bill resting on the marble floor, her face draining of all remaining color as the memory registered. You looked at me with absolute disgust. I continued, the memory crystal clear in my mind. You threw $20 at my feet right in the middle of your immaculate living room. You told me I was a charity case. You told me to figure out my own college tuition because you did not finance failures. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no pity, no regret, and zero hesitation. Figure it out, Brenda. I turned my back on her. I did not wait for a response. I walked toward the heavy oak doors, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, the sound echoing like gunshots in the silent room. Naya Brenda shrieked. It was a raw, primal scream of pure, unfiltered terror. Nia, wait. You cannot do this. Nia. I did not look back. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped out into the grand lobby. The resort was still in a state of chaotic shock, the wealthy guests buzzing about the arrests. But I walked straight through the center of it all with my head held high. I ignored the stares and the frantic whispers. I walked out the front glass doors and stepped into the humid tropical night air. A black federal SUV was waiting for me at the curb, its engine idling quietly in the dark. The lead FBI agent held the back door open. I climbed inside the heavy armored door, shutting securely behind me, leaving the ruins of the family empire entirely in the past. The heavy armored door of the federal SUV shut securely behind me, sealing out the humid Bahamian night and leaving the absolute ruins of the family empire entirely in the past. As the vehicle pulled away from the luxury resort, I did not look out the tinted windows. I simply leaned back against the leather seat and took my first breath of truly free air. 6 months flew by with the brutal, uncompromising efficiency of the federal justice system. The resulting fallout was a spectacular, highly televised dismantling of everything Desmond and his accomplices had built. Federal courtrooms are distinctly cold, sterile environments that care absolutely nothing for pastoral anointing fake miracles or inherited political pedigrees. I attended the final sentencing hearings not for closure, but to witness the exact moment the scales of justice finally balanced. Desmond stood before the federal judge completely stripped of his tailored suits and his manufactured charisma. He was drowning in a standard-issue, oversized orange prison jumpsuit. When the judge struck the gavel and handed down a sentence of 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole, Desmond did not quote scripture. He collapsed. His knees buckled, and 2 federal marshals had to physically drag the weeping, ruined false prophet out of the courtroom. Harper received the exact same 25-year sentence. Her trial had been a media circus, primarily because her own father, the powerful state senator, served as the star witness for the prosecution. He delivered every piece of incriminating evidence necessary to secure his own immunity deal. Upon hearing her sentence, Harper's carefully crafted socialite facade shattered completely. She screamed wildly, hurling vile insults at the judge, her father, and the jury, until a bailiff forcefully silenced her. Her political invincibility was permanently traded for a concrete cell. Trey, the fragile golden child, who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life, wept uncontrollably through his entire plea allocution. He eagerly traded every secret of his fraudulent real estate shell companies in exchange for leniency, but the sheer volume of his financial crimes still earned him a mandatory 10-year federal sentence. Sasha was handed a 5-year sentence for her active role in the money laundering and possession of stolen property. The woman who had proudly flaunted stolen diamonds was last reported trading her remaining designer hair extensions for basic commissary items. And Brenda was left with exactly what she had earned. She was evicted from her sprawling Atlanta mansion when the Department of Treasury seized all assets connected to the church. With her bank accounts frozen and her credit completely destroyed, the former untouchable matriarch was relocated to a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had no golden son left to shield her, no wealthy son-in-law to fund her lifestyle, and absolutely no public dignity remaining. While they traded their luxurious freedom for prison bars, I returned to Atlanta to finish the work I had started. I stood at the wooden podium in the center of the crowded community hall. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the elderly pensioners, the single mothers, and the working-class families who had faithfully poured their life savings into Desmond's fraudulent holy empire. For 12 years, these exact same people had looked down on me. They had whispered behind my back, judging me for not deferring to Brenda, for not playing the role of the submissive, silent pastor's wife. Today, nobody was whispering. They were looking at me with overwhelming, tearful reverence. Through relentless cooperation with the federal investigators and my own meticulous forensic accounting, I had successfully managed the complete recovery of the stolen funds. I looked out across the sea of faces and held up the finalized transfer documents. $15 million had been completely seized from the offshore Bahamian accounts and was currently being legally redistributed directly back into the church's pension fund and the Community Development Trust. The community hall erupted. It was not the manufactured, manipulated cheering of a Sunday service. It was the raw, genuine sound of hundreds of people realizing their futures had just been handed back to them. Elderly women wept openly, clutching their chests. Men who had lost everything stood up and applauded. They hailed me as a hero, but I did not want their worship. I simply wanted their financial security restored. I stepped down from the podium, shaking hands and accepting tearful embraces as I made my way through the crowd. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the community hall and stepped directly into the bright, warm Atlanta sunshine. I walked 2 blocks down the street, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement, until I reached my final destination. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the beautiful historic 2-story brick property. It was my grandmother's house. The peeling paint and rotting wood were entirely gone. The property had been meticulously, flawlessly restored. The wide front porch was freshly painted, the roof was brand new, and the landscaping was immaculate. I had used my own legally protected business funds to buy the property back from the city. It was now newly deeded entirely and securely in my name alone. A polished brass plaque was securely mounted right beside the heavy oak front door. It read, "The Eleanor Financial Literacy Center." I watched as a group of 3 young black women walked up the steps carrying notebooks and chatting excitedly. They were entering a space designed to teach them how to manage assets, how to read complex financial documents, and how to build generational wealth. They were learning how to protect themselves so they would never have to rely on a charismatic predator like Desmond or cower to an abusive manipulator like Brenda. I took a slow, deep breath of the warm morning air. I lifted my coffee cup, taking a long, satisfying sip. I watched the young women walk through the front doors of my grandmother's house. I smiled, feeling a profound, absolute sense of peace settle deeply into my bones. The outcast had not just survived the fire. I had taken the ashes and built an empire of true excellence, living a life of unshakable permanent power.